My grandfather, Weston, left me his entire estate, but my mother, Quinn, demanded I sign the deed over to my brother, Derek, immediately. When I refused, she delivered a chilling ultimatum: comply or be erased from the family. Heartbroken, I remembered the one secret weapon Weston had left me. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the scent of lilies and stale coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, the polished oak surface cool against my forearms. My head was throbbing, a rhythmic, dull ache behind my eyes that hadn't left me since the funeral service ended 3 hours ago. I was 28 years old, but in that moment, sitting in the house that had been my sanctuary and my prison for the last 5 years, I felt ancient. My bones ached with a fatigue that sleep wouldn't fix. The will reading had been short, brutally short. Grandfather Weston had been a man of few words, and his final legal testament reflected that. To my granddaughter, Natalia, I leave the property at 42 Willow Creek and the entirety of its contents. That was it, no long speeches, no distribution of jewelry or stocks, just the house. The house I had scrubbed, maintained, and lived in while I wiped his chin and managed his oxygen tanks. I heard the gravel crush in the driveway. The sound was distinct, heavy tires rolling too fast. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. My stomach did a slow, sick somersault. The front door didn't open. It was thrown wide. Natalia. The voice was sharp, manicured, and devoid of any maternal warmth. It was Quinn, my mother. I didn't stand up. I couldn't. I just watched as they walked into the kitchen. Quinn led the charge, her black funeral dress still perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. Behind her was Derek, my older brother. He looked disheveled, his tie loosened, his face flushed with a mix of grief and something that looked dangerously like anticipation. "We need to talk," Quinn said, dropping her purse onto the table. It made a heavy thud next to my empty mug. "Can't this wait?" I whispered, my voice raspy. "We buried him 4 hours ago, Mom." "Don't call me that right now," she snapped, her eyes scanning the kitchen, assessing the appliances, the fixtures, the view of the garden. "We don't have time for sentimentality. Derek has a viewing scheduled for his apartment next week. He needs to know where he stands." I blinked, the headache spiking. "What?" Derek pulled out a chair and sat opposite me, leaning in. He smelled of scotch and expensive cologne. "Look, Nat, we know what the will said. The lawyer is an old fool, probably barely lucid himself. But we all know what Grandpa meant." "He meant what he wrote," I said, my hands trembling slightly beneath the table. Quinn laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, please, you're a single woman, Natalia. You're a what is it you do again? An archivist? You preserve old papers. You don't have a family, you don't have a legacy." She gestured to Derek. "Your brother has 3 children, my grandchildren. Do you really think Weston wanted them growing up in a rental while you rattle around in a 4-bedroom colonial all by yourself?" "I took care of him," I said, the words feeling small in the large room. "For 5 years, I lived here. This is my home." "It's a family asset," Quinn corrected, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. "And you are going to correct the mistake he made. We have the papers in the car. A simple quitclaim deed. You transfer the title to Derek. We'll give you 3 months to find a chaotic little apartment somewhere, maybe closer to that museum you love so much." I looked at Derek. He wasn't even looking at me. He was looking at the ceiling, probably calculating how much it would cost to remove the crown molding. "No," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Quinn's face didn't change, but her eyes went dead. "Excuse me." I said no. Weston left the house to me. He told me he was going to. He wanted me to have it. Quinn leaned over the table. Her face was inches from mine. I could see the heavy foundation settling into the fine lines around her mouth. "Listen to me very carefully, Natalia. You have always been the difficult one, the selfish one. If you keep this house, if you take the roof from over your nephews' heads, you are done. I will not have a daughter who steals from her own flesh and blood. I'm not stealing. You sign that deed by tomorrow morning, she hissed, cutting me off. Or you never speak to us again. No Christmas. No birthdays. You won't see the boys. You will be a stranger to this family. She straightened up, smoothing her dress. Think about it. Choose the house or see. Who's your mother? They turned and walked out. The door slammed, shaking the frame. I sat there in the settling dust, the vibration of the slam humming in my teeth, realizing that the loss of my grandfather wasn't the end of the pain. It was just the opening act. The betrayal hit me harder than the grief. It was sharper, colder, and infinitely more permanent than death. For a long time, I didn't move. The sun began to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the kitchen floor. The refrigerator hummed, the ice maker clattered, and the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the seconds of my new, isolated life. I felt physically ill. It wasn't just the headache anymore. It was a deep, visceral nausea that roiled in my gut. My mother's ultimatum echoed in the empty room. Choose the house or choose your mother. It was a false choice, of course. A trap. If I chose the house, I lost my family. If I chose my mother, I lost my home, my inheritance, and my dignity, only to remain the subservient doormat I had apparently always been to them. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked to the sink to get a glass of water. My hands were shaking so bad I splashed water down the front of my black dress. I stripped it off right there in the kitchen, leaving it in a pile on the floor, and wrapped myself in one of Weston's old flannel cardigans that was hanging on the back of a chair. It smelled like tobacco and peppermint, his scent. I wandered into the living room. They had been here less than 10 minutes, but the energy of the house felt violated. Quinn had looked at the room not as a place where her father had died, but as square footage. Derek had looked at the ceiling like he was already tearing it down. I collapsed onto the sofa, pulling the cardigan tight. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Derek. Don't be a brat, Nat. Quinn is really upset. Just sign the papers. I've got a contractor coming at 8 a.m. Tuesday to look at the load-bearing wall in the dining room. Need you to be out of the way. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Tuesday? That was 2 days away. He hadn't even waited for me to agree. He was already scheduling demolition. He was that confident, that arrogant. He truly believed that my no was just a temporary glitch, a temper tantrum that would be smoothed over by the steamroller of Quinn's will. They viewed me as an obstacle, a placeholder. To them, I wasn't a person with rights or feelings. I was just the girl who changed the bedpans and now needed to get out of the way so the real heir could take his throne. I remembered the last Christmas Weston was lucid. We were sitting by the fire, just the two of us. Quinn and Derek hadn't shown up, Derek had gone skiing in Aspen, and Quinn had a gala she couldn't miss. Weston had looked at me, his eyes cloudy but sharp. They see the world differently than we do, Natalia, he had rasped, his hand gripping his cane. They see price tags where we see value. Don't let them appraise you, and never let them appraise this house. I hadn't fully understood what he meant then. I thought he was just being sentimental about the woodwork. Now, looking at Derek's text, the rage began to simmer beneath the nausea. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They thought I was submissive because I was a caregiver. They thought that because I had spent 5 years serving others, I had no spine left to stand up for myself. I didn't reply to the text. I turned off my phone. I walked to the hallway and looked at the portrait of Weston hanging above the telephone table. He looked stern, unyielding. They want a war, Grandpa, I whispered to the empty air. I went to the study, the one room Quinn hadn't entered yet. It was filled with blueprints and old maps. Weston had been a surveyor in his youth, a man who understood boundaries, property lines, and the ironclad nature of legal descriptions. I sat at his massive mahogany desk. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of National Geographic magazines from the 1980s, was a heavy, leather-bound folder. Weston had given it to me 3 days before he died. "Open this when the vultures circle," he had whispered, winking, and not a moment before. I placed my hand on the cool leather. Quinn and Derek had the aggression, the volume, and the entitlement. They had the threats. But they had forgotten one crucial thing about Weston. He never started a project without a blueprint, and he never left a job unfinished. To understand why the betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand the last 5 years. I didn't just live with my grandfather. I paused my entire life for him. At 23, I had just finished my master's degree in archival studies. I had a job offer at a prestigious museum in Chicago. I had a boyfriend. I had a plan. Then Weston had his first stroke. Quinn, my mother, was the first to suggest a home. A nice facility, she had. Called it while checking her reflection in the hospital window. Somewhere they can handle the mess. Derek hadn't even come to the hospital. He was launching his first startup, a boutique dropshipping business that failed 6 months later and claimed he couldn't step away from the grind. I was the one who said no. Weston was terrified of nursing homes. He was a proud, private man who loved his garden and his library. So, I turned down the job. I broke up with the boyfriend who didn't want to be tied down to a nursemaid. I moved into the guest room at 42 Willow Creek. For 5 years, I was the landscape architect of his decline. I managed the medications. I learned how to lift a grown man without breaking my back. I cooked pureed meals that actually tasted like food. I read to him when his eyes failed. I held his hand through the night terrors. And where was Quinn? Quinn was a real estate stager. It was the perfect profession for her. She was a master of illusions. She knew exactly how to arrange furniture to hide a water stain, how to angle a mirror to make a room look bigger than it was, how to bake cookies she didn't eat just to create a scent profile for an open house. Her entire life was a facade. She would visit Weston maybe once a month. She'd breeze in, wearing 4-inch heels that clicked loudly on the hardwood, bringing a bouquet of flowers that she would arrange herself, critique the dust on the mantel, and leave after 20 minutes because the energy was too heavy. She never changed a diaper. She never sat through a fever. She never saw him as a human being who was suffering. She saw him as a deteriorating asset. And then there was Derek. My brother, the golden boy. At 34, Derek was a professional entrepreneur. He had cycled through 5 different careers: crypto consultant, high-end sneaker flipper, life coach, and was currently calling himself a luxury asset manager, which I think meant he washed cars for rich people, though he claimed he was brokering deals. Derek had 3 kids with 2 different women, and he used those children like currency. Whenever he needed money, he'd bring the boys over to Quinn's house. He'd sigh about how little Timmy needed braces or how the twins were outgrowing their shoes. Quinn, desperate to maintain the image of the perfect matriarch, would open her checkbook every time. But Weston had seen through him. "He's hollow, Natalia," Weston had told me once, watching Derek pace around the garden talking loudly on his phone. "He's all veneer, no grain." Now, looking back, I realized Quinn and Derek had been banking on this moment for years. They didn't help with the caretaking because they assumed the payout was guaranteed. They viewed my 5 years of servitude not as a sacrifice, but as rent payment. I was the live-in help, keeping the asset warm until the real owner was ready to take possession. I looked at the leather folder on the desk. The antagonist of my story wasn't just greed, it was my mother. Quinn was a woman who believed she could stage manage reality. She thought she could rearrange family loyalty like throw pillows. She thought she could bully me into submission because I had always been the quiet one, the good daughter. But quiet doesn't mean weak, and archivists, we keep receipts. I stared at the leather folder for a long time before I dared to open it. The house was settling around me, the creaks and groans of the timber sounding like old bones stretching. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the pane of the study window. A sound I used to find comforting, but now sounded like a warning. My hands were still trembling, a residual effect of the adrenaline from the kitchen confrontation. I took a deep breath, the smell of Weston's pipe tobacco still lingering in the heavy velvet curtains, and flipped the cover open. It wasn't just papers inside, it was an arsenal. On top lay a letter, handwritten in Weston's shaky, late-stage calligraphy. The ink was blue, the pressure uneven, indicating he had written it on one of his bad days, perhaps weeks before the end. My dearest Natalia, if you are reading this, two things have happened. First, I have gone to join your grandmother. Second, the wolves have come to the door. I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and painful. He knew, he had always known. I love your mother, but I am not blind to her nature. And Derek is a man drowning in a sea of his own making, looking for a raft to steal. They will try to take this house from you. They will tell you it is for the legacy. They will tell you it is for the children. They will bully you, gaslight you, and threaten to cut you off. Do not let them. Not because of the house. Bricks and mortar are just things, but because if you give them what they want, you will not be saving them. You will be feeding a beast that will never be full. Everything you need is in this folder. I spent the last 6 months why? My attorney, Mr. Henderson, securing your future. I didn't just leave you the house, Natalia. I left you the truth. I set the letter aside, my vision blurring. Beneath it was a thick document titled The Willow Creek Preservation Trust. I wasn't a lawyer, but my work as an archivist meant I was comfortable with dense, complex documentation. I began to read, tracing the lines with my finger. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was clear. Weston hadn't just willed me the house in a simple transfer that could be contested or bullied away. He had placed the property into a living trust 3 years ago, naming me as the sole beneficiary and, crucially, the successor trustee upon his death. But there was a clause on page 4 that made my breath catch. Clause 14b, the spendthrift provision. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that the assets of the trust, the house, were protected from any creditors of the beneficiary. But more importantly, it included a conditional occupancy clause for any other family members. It explicitly stated that Derek and Quinn were barred from residing in or selling the property for a period of 10 years. Weston had locked them out from the grave. He had anticipated they would try to force me to sell, so he had made the house legally unsellable by anyone but me. And even then, the proceeds would go into a managed fund, not cash. But why? Why go to such extreme lengths? I dug deeper into the folder. Beneath the trust documents was a manila envelope labeled Due Diligence. Inside were printouts, financial records, public court dockets. I pulled out the first sheet. It was a credit report for Derek. The numbers were staggering. Credit card debt, $45,000. Personal loans, $80,000. A repossession order for a Range Rover dated 3 months ago. But the next document was worse. It was a lawsuit filing against Prestige Ventures LLC, Derek's latest shell company. He was being sued for breach of contract and fraud by 3 different investors. The total sought damages exceeded $200,000. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. Derek wasn't just in a bad spot. He was catastrophic. He was drowning. Then I found the file on Quinn. My mother, the impeccable, perfect Quinn. The woman who judged my thrift store cardigans and my sensible shoes. There was a foreclosure notice on her investment property. A condo she claimed she was renting out for passive income. It was dated 6 weeks ago, and attached to it was a loan modification application for her own primary residence, claiming financial hardship. I sat back, the papers scattering slightly across the mahogany desk. The narrative they had spun in the kitchen, that this was about family legacy, about Grandpa's mistake, about giving Derek's children a stable home, was a complete fabrication, a lie constructed of desperate masonry. They didn't want the house for the kids. They didn't want to live here. They wanted the deed so they could liquidate it immediately. They needed the equity. They needed the cash to plug the massive, gaping holes in their own financial Titanics before they sank. If I had signed that quitclaim deed, the house would have been on the market by Friday. Weston's library would be gutted. The garden he loved would be bulldozed for curb appeal. And the money? It wouldn't go to my nephew's college funds. It would go to pay off Derek's fraud lawsuits and Quinn's bad mortgages. They were going to cannibalize my inheritance to cover their mistakes, and they were willing to disown me to do it. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest, replacing the fear. I wasn't just a daughter or a sister anymore. I was the archivist, and I had just discovered the provenance of their greed. I opened my laptop. It was 2:00 a.m. I wasn't going to sleep. I needed to verify everything. I logged into the county clerk's public records database. I searched Derek's name. Click result found, click result found, click result found. Judgments, liens. A garnish order on a bank account that no longer existed. Then I searched Quinn. There it was. A second mortgage taken out on her home just last year. A high-interest, predatory loan type, usually reserved for people with desperate credit. They were broke, both of them. They were projecting an image of wealth and success while standing on a trapdoor that was about to open. I printed everything. I organized it into binders. I labeled them. Exhibit A, Exhibit B. By the time the sun began to bleed gray light through the sheer curtains, I wasn't the weeping girl in the kitchen anymore. I was a fortress. I had the facts. I had the map. And I knew exactly where the landmines were buried. At 7:45 a.m. on Tuesday, I showered, dressed in my sharpest blazer. The one Quinn said made me look severe, and made a fresh pot of coffee. I sat on the front porch swing, the folder on my lap, and waited for the vultures to arrive. Derek was early. At 7:55 a.m., his black SUV pulled into the driveway, followed closely by Quinn's pristine white sedan. They parked aggressively, taking up the entire width of the turning circle, boxing in my small Honda Civic. It was a power move, a physical manifestation of their intent to dominate the space. I didn't stand up. I stayed on the porch swing, sipping my coffee, watching them over the rim of the mug. Derek got out first. He was wearing a suit, but he looked tired. The bags under his eyes were heavy, and there was a frantic energy in the way he slammed the car door. He wasn't alone. A man in a windbreaker with a clipboard climbed out of the passenger side. The contractor, I assumed. Quinn emerged from her car like a queen exiting a carriage, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. She carried a thick envelope, the deed. They marched up the walkway. The crunch of their shoes on the gravel was the only sound in the morning air. "You're up," Derek called out, his voice feigning cheerfulness but tight with tension. "Good, we have a lot to get through today." They reached the bottom of the porch steps. I looked down at them, rocking slightly on the swing. "Good morning," I said. My voice was calm, steady. It sounded foreign to my own ears. "This is Mr. Evans," Derek said, gesturing to the man with the clipboard. "He's going to check the foundation and the load-bearing walls. We need to know if we can open up the kitchen to the living room before we list. Before we settle in." The slip was subtle, but I caught it. Before we list. "Mr. Evans isn't coming inside," I said. The silence that followed was sharp. Derek's smile faltered, twitching at the corners. Quinn took off her sunglasses, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me," Quinn said, her voice dropping that dangerous octave. "Natalia, we discussed this. We are not doing this again." "We didn't discuss anything," I replied. "You gave orders, I listened. Now I'm speaking. This is private property. Mr. Evans is trespassing. Please leave." Mr. Evans looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Mr. Sterling, you said you were the owner." "I am the owner," Derek snapped, his face flushing red. He turned to me, pointing a finger that shook slightly. "Cut the act, Nat. Mom has the papers. You sign them, we give you a check for $10,000 to help you move, and we get on with our lives. Don't make a scene in front of the contractor." $10,000, I repeated. That's generous, Derek, especially considering you owe American Express $45,000. Derek froze. His arm dropped to his side as if the strings had been cut. Quinn stepped forward, placing herself between me and Derek. What are you talking about? Don't be ridiculous. And the judgment from Prestige Ventures, I continued, opening the folder on my lap. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I read from the paper like I was reading a grocery list. Case number CV 2024-998, fraud and breach of contract. Damages sought, $210,000. I looked up. Derek's face had gone the color of ash. And you, mother, I said, turning my gaze to her. The foreclosure notice on the condo, the high-risk second mortgage on your house, you're both insolvent. You went through our private financial records. Quinn shrieked, her composure shattering instantly. How dare you? That is illegal. That is. It's public record, Quinn, I said, using her first name intentionally. It took me 3 hours on the county clerk's website. Anyone could find it. And I'm guessing the reason you're so desperate to get the title to this house today is because Derek has a court hearing next week, doesn't he? Derek lunged forward, taking a step up the stairs. You shut your mouth, you don't know anything. This is about the family. It is about the family, I said, standing up now. I was taller than Quinn, and with the elevation of the porch, I towered over them. It's about you trying to liquidate Grandpa's legacy to pay for your gambling and your lies. You were never going to live here. You were never going to move the boys in. You were going to sell it to a developer, maybe even Mr. Evans here, and strip it for cash. I looked at Mr. Evans. Are you a contractor or a developer? Mr. Evans cleared his throat, looking at his clipboard. I represent Highland Development Group. We specialize in rapid acquisitions. Get off my property, I said to him. Now. Mr. Evans didn't wait for Derek's permission. He turned and walked briskly back to the SUV. Derek looked like he was going to vomit, but Quinn went cold. The shock on her face hardened into something ugly, something reptilian. You think you're so smart, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You think digging up some dirt changes anything? You are one person, Natalia. You are a nobody. We are your family. If you don't sign that house over, I will ruin you. Why? LL tell everyone, Aunt Margaret, the cousins, the church, that you manipulated a dying old man. That you forced him to change his will while he was medicated. We will sue you for undue influence. We will tie this house up in court for years until you bleed dry. Do it, I said. But before you do, you might want to know about the trust. What trust? Derek snapped. The Willow Creek Preservation Trust, I said, holding up the document. Weston put the house in a trust 3 years ago. I am the trustee. And there is a specific clause that says if any family member contests the validity of the trust or the will, they are automatically disinherited from any future distribution. And furthermore, I paused, letting the words hang in the air. The trust forbids the sale of the home for 10 years. You're lying, Quinn whispered. Read it, I said, tossing the photocopy down the stairs. It landed at her feet. Quinn snatched it up, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. Derek read over her shoulder. I watched the realization wash over them. They were trapped. They couldn't sell it. Even if they bullied me into resigning as trustee, the restrictions were baked into the deed. The asset was liquid-proof. You BTCH, Derek spat, looking up at me with pure hatred. You selfish, manipulative little BTCH. Get off my driveway, I said, sitting back down on the swing and picking up my coffee. Or I call the police. And I think, given your current legal standing, Derek, the last thing you want is police involvement. They didn't leave immediately. They stood there for a long minute, radiating hate. Then, without a word, Quinn turned, marched to her car, and got in. Derek followed, slamming his door so hard the SUV rocked. They peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying onto the grass. I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had won the battle. But as I watched their cars disappear around the bend, I knew the war had just begun. Quinn's threat about ruining me wasn't an idle one. She was a master of narrative, and she was about to spin a story that would turn the entire extended family against me. The silence after they left was short-lived. By noon, my phone began to blow up. Not calls from Quinn or Derek, they were too smart for that now. They knew I was documenting things. No, the attacks came from the flying monkeys. First, it was Aunt Margaret. "Natalia, your mother just called me in tears. She says you kicked her off the property. After she just buried her father, I knew you were stressed, but to be so cruel to your own mother when she's trying to help you manage the estate. Call her and apologize immediately." Then Cousin Bate. "Hey Nat, hearing some crazy stuff about you blocking Derek from the house. You know he promised those rooms to the twins, right? Don't be the evil aunt. Just let them have the house, you don't need all that space." Then, a darker message from an unknown number. "You're going to regret crossing us. We're coming for everything. The archives job, gone. Your reputation, gone." I blocked the numbers. I turned off notifications. But the anxiety was a living thing, crawling under my skin. I felt isolated. Quinn was painting a masterpiece of a lie. Natalia, the unstable, greedy daughter, taking advantage of a senile old man to steal the family home from her struggling brother and his innocent children. It was a good story. People love a villain, and Quinn knew exactly how to cast me as one. I needed help. I couldn't fight this on an island. I called Mr. Henderson, Weston's attorney. He answered on the second ring. "I expected to hear from you, Natalia," his gruff voice said. "Your mother called my office an hour ago. She was unpleasant. She threatened to sue for undue influence," I said, pacing the living room. "She's telling the family I manipulated him." "Let her talk," Henderson said calmly. "We have the video." I stopped pacing. "Video." "Weston insisted on it," Henderson explained. "When we signed the final trust documents, we recorded the session. We have him on tape, clear as day, explaining exactly why he was leaving the house to you and why he was excluding them. He explicitly mentions Derek's gambling and Quinn's spending. He calls them, and I quote, financial vampires. It's admissible. If they file a suit, we play the tape. It will destroy them in court." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Weston wanted you to find your own strength first," Henderson said gently. "He said, give her the sword, but let her learn to swing it before you give her the shield." I felt a fresh wave of tears, but I blinked them back. "Okay, so we're safe legally." "Legally, yes, but socially. That's a different court, Natalia, and I can't help you there." He was right. The law was on my side, but Quinn was winning the court of public opinion. I needed something that would break her hold on the family narrative. I needed to prove to Aunt Marg, Errett, and everyone else that this wasn't about me being greedy. It was about Quinn and Derek being frauds. I went back to the paperwork. I had the debts. I had the lawsuits, but I needed the connection. I needed to prove they had conspired to sell the house before Weston was even dead. I remembered Derek's contractor, Mr. Evans from Highland Development Group. I went online and searched for the company. It was a legitimate firm. I navigated to their current projects page. Nothing. I went to upcoming acquisitions. And there it was. A PDF brochure labeled Proposed Redevelopment, the Willow Creek Estates. I clicked it, my heart stopped. It was a proposal to demolish 42 Willow Creek, my grandfather's house, and 2 neighboring lots to build a complex of 6 luxury townhomes. The proposal was dated 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Weston was still alive. I scrolled down. The proposal included a signed letter of intent to sell, contingent upon title transfer. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was Brenda Quinn Sterling, executor pending. She had signed a deal to sell the house while her father was still breathing in the next room. She had presented herself as the executor, which she wasn't, and promised the land to a developer. But that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was the deposit. The document referenced a good faith deposit. of $50,000 paid to the seller to secure the exclusive rights. If Quinn and Derek had taken $50,000 from a developer for a house they didn't own and spent it, that wasn't just family drama, that was criminal fraud. I checked the date of the deposit against the bank records I had found in Derek's file. He had foolishly left a bank statement in the kitchen months ago that I had filed away. On the exact date of the deposit, a deposit of $25,000 hit Derek's account. The other $25,000 presumably went to Quinn. And 2 days later, Derek transferred $20,000 to an online sportsbook. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. They hadn't just planned to sell it. They had already sold it. They had taken the money and gambled it away. Now, the developer was coming for the deed, and if they couldn't deliver, they would be facing criminal charges for theft by deception. That was the desperation. That was the panic. They weren't fighting for a house, they were fighting to stay out of prison. I had them. I had the proof that would silence every flying monkey in the family. I picked up my phone. I saw a text from Aunt Margaret. "We're having a family meeting on Sunday at my house to discuss what to do about you. You need to come and explain yourself." I typed a reply, my fingers steady. "I'll be there, and I'll bring everything." Aunt Margaret's house in the suburbs was the traditional gathering place for the Sterling clan. It was a sprawling, beige split level that smelled perpetually of potpourri and judgment. I pulled my Honda Civic up to the curb. The driveway was already full. Quinn's sedan and Derek's SUV were parked prominently near the front door, flanked by the cars of my cousins and uncles. It looked like a funeral procession, but I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that it was actually a trial. And I was the defendant. I grabbed the heavy box of documents from the passenger seat. My hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from a vibrating, high-frequency rage. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes clear, jaw set, and walked up the path. I didn't knock, I just walked in. The living room was crowded. There were about 15 people there, aunts, uncles, cousins. They were seated in a semicircle around the fireplace, where Quinn sat in a high-backed armchair, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Derek stood behind her, hand on her shoulder, looking like the dutiful, protective son. The conversation died instantly when I entered. 15 pairs of eyes swiveled to me. The silence was thick, heavy, and hostile. "You came," Aunt Margaret said, stepping forward. She was a stern woman with a soft heart that Quinn had weaponized. "We weren't sure you would show your face." "I have nothing to hide, Aunt Margaret," I said, my voice steady. I walked to the center of the room, placing the box on the coffee table. The thud it made was the only sound in the room. "Natalia," Quinn said, her voice trembling theatrically. "Please, just tell them the truth. Tell them how confused Dad was at the end. Tell them how you had him sign those papers when he didn't know what day it was. We can fix this. We can still be a family." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was giving me an out. Admit to being a manipulator, give up the house, and be forgiven. "He wasn't confused, Mother," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "He was the clearest he had been in years." "Don't lie," Derek snapped, stepping out from behind the chair. "He was on morphine. You took advantage of a dying man to steal my children's inheritance." A murmur of agreement went through the room. Cousin Bate shook her head at me, looking disappointed. "Nat, seriously, the boys need that house. You're single, it's selfish." "Selfish," I repeated, tasting the word. "That's the narrative, isn't it? That I'm the greedy spinster hoarding the mansion while the struggling young father suffers." "That is the reality," Quinn sobbed. "No," I said, reaching into the box. "The reality is that Weston knew exactly who you were, and he knew exactly what you would do." I pulled out a laptop and a portable speaker. I set them up on the coffee table, ignoring Derek's scoff. "What is this?" Aunt Margaret asked. "This," I said, plugging in the HDMI cable to Margaret's large TV, "is Weston, recorded 3 weeks before he passed, in Mr. Henderson's office. with 2 witnesses present. No morphine, no confusion. I hit play. The screen flickered to life. There sat grandfather Weston, looking frail but sharp-eyed, wearing his favorite tweed jacket. The room gasped, seeing him alive, moving, speaking. It sucked the air out of the space. "My name is Weston Arthur Sterling," the video Weston said, his voice raspy but firm. "And I am making this statement to clarify my intent regarding the disposition of my estate." Quinn stopped crying. She sat up straighter, her face paling. "I am leaving the house at 42 Willow Creek entirely to my granddaughter, Natalia. She has been my hands, my eyes, and my heart for 5 years." Weston leaned into the camera. "I know my daughter, Brenda, or Quinn, as she calls herself now, and I know my grandson, Derek. I love them, but I do not trust them. They view me as a bank account. They view this family as a transaction." On the screen, Weston held up a finger. "Let me be clear. If I left this house to Derek, it would be sold within the month to pay for his gambling debts. If I left it to Quinn, she would leverage it to cover her failed investments. I am skipping them not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. To save the legacy of this family, I must bypass the rot." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Aunt Margaret looked from the TV to Quinn, her mouth slightly open. "Gambling debts?" she whispered. "It's a fake," Derek yelled, his voice cracking. "That's AI, she deep-faked it, that's not real." "It was recorded by a certified estate attorney," I said calmly. "But if you don't believe the video, maybe you'll believe your own signatures." I reached back into the box and pulled out the binder labeled Highland Development. "You said you wanted the house for the kids, Derek," I said, holding up the brochure. "You said you wanted to raise Timmy and the twins there. So why did you and Mom sign a letter of intent to sell the property to Highland Development Group 3 months ago?" I tossed the document onto the coffee table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of Uncle Bob. He picked it up, putting on his reading glasses. "Townhomes," Bob read aloud. "Demolition of existing structure. Signed Brenda Quinn Sterling." "That's a draft," Quinn shrieked, standing up. "That was just an inquiry to see what it was worth." "An inquiry doesn't require a $50,000 deposit," I countered, pulling out the bank records. "Does it?" I held up the enlarged printouts of the bank transfers. "Here is the wire transfer from Highland Development to an account managed by Quinn and Derek Holdings. $50,000, paid 90 days ago." I took a step toward them. "And here is the transfer, 2 days later, from that account to BetMGM Sportsbook and Vegas Kings Online. $20,000. I turned to the rest of the room. They didn't want the house for the family. They had already sold it. They took 50 grand from a developer for a house they didn't own, and they gambled it away. They needed me to sign that deed today because if they don't deliver the title by the end of the month, they are liable for criminal fraud. They aren't trying to save the legacy. They are trying to stay out of jail." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Aunt Margaret turned on Quinn with a ferocity I had never seen. "You sold Dad's house before he was even dead, and you gambled the money." "It wasn't like that," Quinn stammered, backing away. We were investing, it was a sure thing, we were going to pay it back." "You told me you needed money for Timmy's tuition," Cousin Bate yelled at Derek. "I lent you $2,000 last month. Did that go to a sports book too?" Derek looked like a trapped animal. He looked at the door, then at me. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "You jealous, miserable." "Enough," Uncle Bob stood up. He was a retired police officer, and his voice carried the weight of authority. "Derek, shut your mouth. Quinn, sit down." "No," Aunt Margaret said, her voice shaking with tears. "Get out, both of you, get out of my house." "Margaret, please," Quinn pleaded, reaching for her sister's hand. "Don't touch me," Margaret recoiled. "You dragged us all here to bully Natalia. You made us accomplices to your theft. You looked me in the eye and told me Dad was confused. The only confusion here was assuming you had a conscience." "Get out," Bates screamed. Derek didn't wait. He stormed out the front door. Quinn stood there for a moment, looking at the circle of family members who were now looking at her with pure disgust. Her mask had finally, completely slipped. She looked old, tired, and incredibly small. She looked at me one last time. There was no anger left, just a hollow, terrified realization of what she had lost. She turned and walked out the door. When the latch clicked shut, the energy in the room collapsed. Aunt Margaret sank onto the sofa and buried her face in her hands. I stood there, the binder still in my hand, feeling the adrenaline drain away, leaving me exhausted but lighter than I had felt in years. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely of their own making. Highland Development Group did not take kindly to being defrauded. When I sent them a certified letter informing them that the property was held in a trust and that the sellers had no legal standing to negotiate a deal, they pulled the plug immediately. Since Quinn and Derek had already spent the $50,000 deposit, they couldn't pay it back. Highland filed criminal charges for theft by deception and civil suits for damages. Derek's house of cards collapsed first. The fraud investigation triggered an audit of his other businesses. He was indicted on 3 counts of wire fraud 2 months later. His ex-wives, finally seeing the truth of his finances, garnished what little wages he could earn. He ended up moving into a basement apartment 3 towns over, working at a car rental agency. I heard through the grapevine that he blames me for everything, telling anyone who will listen that his sister stole his empire. No one listens. Quinn fared no better. To pay back Highland and avoid jail time, she had to liquidate everything. She sold her condo. She sold her car. She cashed out her meager retirement. She avoided prison, but she lost her status, which to Quinn was a fate worse than death. She moved into a small, 1-bedroom apartment in a complex she used to make fun of. She sends me letters sometimes, long, rambling notes oscillating between begging for money and blaming me for her humiliation. I archive them, I don't read them. The reconciliation I found wasn't with them. It was with the rest of the family and with the house itself. A week after the showdown, Aunt Margaret came to Willow Creek. She brought a lasagna and a bottle of wine. We sat on the back porch, watching the sun go down over Weston's garden. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet. "I should have known, I should have looked closer. It was just easier to believe her because, well, she's my sister, and you were always so quiet." "I know," I said, "it's okay." "It's not okay," Margaret insisted. "We left you alone to do the hard work, and then we judged you for it. Weston was right. You were the only one who really loved him." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "You belong here, Natalia. This is your home." That night, after Margaret left, I walked through the house. It felt different now. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the funeral was gone. The threat of the demolition, the staging, the selling, it had all evaporated. I went into the library. I sat at Weston's desk. I had used the skills he taught me, patience, documentation, attention to detail, to save what he loved. I wasn't just an archivist of old papers anymore. I was the guardian of this place. I opened the drawer where the leather folder had been. I placed a new document inside, the final court judgment dismissing Quinn's claims against the estate. I looked up at the portrait of Weston above the mantel. In the dim light, he looked like he was smiling. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "The wolves are gone." The house creaked around me, a warm, settling sound. I was safe. I was home. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission to stay.